welcome to the Mapping Inspirational Women podcast Today I'm with Sara. Sara, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Sara Abdel Ghany. I'm a PhD researcher. I actually just submitted my PhD this month. So,
Woo!
in politics and international study in the University of Work. I'm also the director and the founder of the Global South Initiative, which hopefully we'll talk about later on.
Yes, definitely. That's how we knew each other.
This is exactly how I got to know you because you were so interested in building networks and how academics can be connected in a more personal way. So yeah, I'm grateful we made that connection, and here we are
Yeah.
now.
Yes. So, and sorry for the video. What people who's listening, who's watching this podcast, because of my Wi-Fi situation, we probably have to switch to audio only. So you can get a break from the video and
Yeah.
yeah. So, Sarah, I want to ask you a starter question first.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The starter question is, where is your favorite place?
Um, my favorite place have to be my city,
Mhm.
Cairo, which is it's a very complicated city. So it's a
It has a long
um,
history. Yeah.
yeah. So it's not really like a serene city. No, it's quite hectic. It's quite
Mhm.
busy, um, but it is filled with a lot of the history, the richness, the traditions, the so it really symbolizes to me what Egypt is,
Mhm.
the past, the future, what people are going through, what people are feeling. It's um usually Cairns, describe the relationship they have with Cairo as a love-hate relationship. Uh it's the kind of place that, curse all the time, but actually deep inside you love. So I'm always interested in stuff that is not really clearly seen, it's not easily understood, and usually there are a lot of stories to
Yeah.
unpack with that, so yeah, so Cairo is my city and where I belong,
Mhm.
and where I'm interested in doing research and learning people's stories. And I think also it is one of those places where I think it is similar to a lot of global south places where people's stories have been told for them
Yeah.
or have been completely erased,
Mm.
but they didn't get to tell their stories by themselves to the world.
Mm.
So yeah, so this is, in so many ways, this is why I'm interested in Cairo, and this is why it's my favorite place.
Yeah. So I still recall that how I get to know about Cairo, like when I was a kid. So in China, we were studying about history and we would
Yeah,
learn about ancient Egypt. And
yeah,
then another appearance of Cairo in my schooling experience was in World War II. I think there was a Cairo
yeah,
Treaty or kind of a conference in Cairo, but I didn't
yeah,
know much about how is it going on. And I really hope that today you tell a little bit more about it, and I already heard some from you.
yeah.
And
Yeah, no,
so,
I mean, it's
mm,
so interesting because I have a Chinese friend, and
mm,
she told me, we were discussing Orientalism, and
yeah,
she told me because of the way she studied Egypt and because of
mm,
how it's presented,
yeah,
not only from Chinese sources, because also she studied abroad. She says,
yeah,
I always thought Egypt was east to China. And, but this is the implication of Orientalist education,
mm,
and how Western civilization has been
yeah,
constructed. Everything is to the east, right? To the east of the west, right?
yeah,
It always struck me as a good example of, how even geographically we are located,
yeah, yeah. Because I'm a geographer. I'm trained as a geographer
Yeah,
since undergraduate, and
yeah,
I still remember the time like went to a course. They talk about all the east, one, north, and south. They're all
yeah,
constructed. It's a constructed directions. But why we
absolutely.
think
Yeah.
uh, Egypt is east? that was
Yeah.
from a Western perspective, right? Especially for like from here, of course, for if we are standing at the standing point of UK, yes, that's the
Yeah.
east.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
at the standing point of China, it's actually to the
Mm.
geographical location to be to the west side. But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
quite interesting about all the imaginary of place and how
Yeah.
you see it from the document. What's the
Absolutely.
discourse behind it?
Absolutely, and I think that's really important. The work of critical geographers like yourself is that, you know, like for a long time we believed, geography to be
Mhm.
factual like science, like, like even science is not the way we believe it is. So
Yes.
reconsidering that factuality is really important, and unpacking the construction
Mhm.
that has been done
Yeah.
is really important. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So now let's move on from the starter to the main questions.
Yeah.
I would like to know more about the women who have inspired you in entering this career, in becoming who you are today.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good question. It makes us think of examples, right? Because there's so
Mhm.
many women around
Yeah,
you in your life, whether
yeah.
they live with us, or they live, their memories live with us.
Mm.
But I feel like for every woman, it's, I have to say my mom
Mhm.
is the biggest influence. And I think that's my mom is someone who is quite who stands up for justice, who speaks truth to power. And I
Mhm.
think like that really influenced me growing up. Like she would definitely like stand up in the street and like, stop someone who's doing something wrong. Like if it's not affect even if it's not affect more so if it's not affecting her at all. So I think like it taught me as a child what is
Mhm.
wrong,
Mhm.
uh, but also that it is wrong not to say anything or not to do anything, and also not to normalize toxic behavior.
Mhm.
um like, I mean, like even like stuff like I remember when we were kids and we would go to like a nice restaurant and that we have visited before with my father, and my mom would point out to the waiter that they are treating us differently because my dad
Mhm.
is not there. Even like these simple things,
Yeah.
like the simple things. So it made me realize how patriarchy work, as a very, very young child, like even in the simplest way, you're paying money for a meal, but you would not get the same respect. Um, so it's like very, very simple stuff, but also like very, very important stuff. Like, if
Yeah.
someone is sexually harassing someone on the street, she would speak up. If
Mhm.
something is happening, injustice is happening at work, she would speak
Yeah.
up. Uh, but and also like when I grew up, we grew up in Oman, which is not uh we say in my family we say it's our second country.
Mhm.
um it's our second home country, but after Egypt. But that's because we love Oman so much.
Mhm.
But we grew up. My parents grew up. Had to raise us for a few years away from our homeland,
Mhm.
Egypt, in Oman, and I grew up in a period where people did not really speak up about politics and stuff like that,
Mhm.
and speak up, and usually, when you talk about Egypt and you talk about countries in the region, you don't really talk about resistance, people's
Mhm.
resistance.
Yeah.
But my parents would always play songs of resistance, and they would tell
Mhm.
stories. Oh, these are, you know singers that would stand in campus and sing songs about this resistance, and tell us the stories coming from this, when Nixon came to visit Egypt, and the hypocrisy of the U.S. coming to Egypt after doing this and this and this
Mhm.
and this. And even the children's song were resistance song. So maybe my parents were a bit too much.
I think
but
it's important though.
but I
Resistance
grew
is
up.
important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
And I grew up with that sense. I grew up that, instead, like we just talked about how what we were told about our countries, and from geography to history. But before going to Egyptian schools, my parents raised me to understand that, history in a way of resistance. a history of the people, before I even know Howard Zen, and how he changed the writing of history. My parents told me the story of Egypt through stories of regular people who resisted. So I became very proud to be Egyptian. And then when I moved to Egypt, and I understood this is not how children feel, and this is not how history is taught. I felt even more grateful that I was taught in a different way, and I was more conscious of things that became erased or unsaid, or not highlighted, or stuff like that. So I think that I'm very grateful for that. Um, I feel like I'm grateful. I'm always surrounded by great women. I have many aunts, and but I also when I started working in human rights and development in Egypt, and most of my coworkers were very passionate women, and it just felt like we're all in the same page. We were doing something for the country. So this was the time of what we call the movement for change. So this was
Yes.
before the revolution. And so a lot of us joined the human rights movement feeling like that might be a place to our work would be a stepping stone towards some change.
Yes.
Um, and so this is what we started working, where I started working, um, and working on different rights like freedom of expression and stuff like that. And at that time, people were speaking up, really speaking up. And at that time, there were blogs, people were starting to use social media and stuff like that. So even like working with people on how to cultivate these talents to speak up more and stuff like that, that was part of the work that we were doing. And um, and I remember bosses or colleague being supportive, because like it was understood what we were doing, so no one would really stop someone from doing something or question something. Like we would discuss certain decision for security purpose, for political purpose, for ethical purposes and stuff like that. But uh I feel like I learned more by from people who let me do the work, and be responsible for the consequences as well. So I've grown in terms, like, that allowed me to grow ladder wise in terms of like in the workforce, but also have the skills, so if someone keeps you in your place, you don't also grow. So also that helped me grow in that way. In terms of academia, so, I mean, apart from work, I've also, as you know, I've done my master's in the School of Oriental and African Studies. So I've studied politics and law, and politics and international law. And I continued to study law in the School of Oriental and African Studies, and I really, learned a lot. Like, I learned a lot from feminist scholars who like critically question what our assumptions, by just asking us why do you think this is what it is. One of the examples is Farida Banda. She was one of my professors in SOAS. She's a professor of human rights and international law, but also of African law. um, she is someone who would sarcastically make fun of things, and once you make a joke of things, you really realize how ridiculous this is, and so it's not normal to think like that. So it really questioned, like, made me understand a lot of gender issues by ridiculing it to the core. So I think it's also appealed to me because Egyptians are very sarcastic people. We're always making fun of things. So it was a good way to learn for me. But I learned a lot of things, and not only in the classroom but also outside of the classroom. A lot of people, I felt, in that atmosphere, came to understand and learn from each other, and that was a unique. I learned afterward that this is not in all academic spaces, that was a unique
Mhm.
academic space that people would just sit for hours talking to each other and learning from each other.
Mm.
So it was really about the people I met there. A lot of them were women, a lot, and some great men as well. I have to say, with in academia in general, I have respect for women who paved the way as academics and excelled as academics, but not only as academics. So
Mm.
they acted the way they spoke and the way they wrote. So they are an example, they are the personification of what they wrote. And I think this is important. Like someone like Angela Davis, you know,
Mhm.
she writes and she moves all of us, but she's an activist, right?
Yeah.
Um, Audre Lorde, you know, first and foremost, she believed herself to be an activist, um, uh, a defender of people's rights, right? Yeah, she wrote this
Yes.
beautiful poems, of course, but she it was meant to move you
Mm.
to the core to take action. June Jordan as well. These are people who spoke, who wrote what they spoke and did what they spoke and wrote. So and it really, these are the people I admire. And I think like we have been seeing this debate recently on social media and generally in academia, that people are losing a lot of faith in big names or academics that we have.
Oh, oh, I can't hear you. You silenced yourself. I think you muted.
Oh, sorry.
Mm.
um Sorry about that. But I was saying that there are, like, now with the crisis, with now with the
Mhm.
war on Gaza,
Yeah.
we're seeing that people have who use critical lens, who
Mhm.
have used Fanon, Edward Said, post-colonial, decolonial, anti-colonial lens and
Mm.
frameworks, or the work of people from the global south, have been completely silenced at this
Mhm.
moment. So it really makes had people question their integrity or authenticity and their
Mm.
work. Um, so I really stand by people who, despite all the difficult, and I know the price is high, right? The
Yeah.
price is high. I understand that.
Yes.
But I mean, I don't see the worth of what we're doing if we
Mhm.
don't if we don't speak what we write, if our writing is not
Yeah.
a path to change, a path of
Mm.
resistance.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
is that why
so
you started Global South Initiative as a way of
yeah,
change, as a path to change and a way of resistance?
yeah. So in a few years ago, I think 3 years ago, we
Mhm.
started the Global South Initiative. We continued having this conversation in
Mhm.
between global south students,
Mm.
and at that time it was PhD students, so we would have that discussion over and over again.
Yeah.
uh, that we're that And the common word would be that people feel invisible, that people
Mhm.
feel unheard, that feel like they don't have their space, they're not welcomed, stuff like that. And
Mm.
it just seemed
Was it
wrong.
in Warwick? You said the PhD. Was it in Warwick that you started it, right?
Yes, yes. So people from different departments
Mm.
repeated the same sentiment.
Oh.
So I felt, okay, let's do something about it. It's just
Yes.
like it doesn't make any sense that we're all feeling this and nothing is
Mm.
being done.
Yeah.
So let's do something about it.
Mm.
And our way of doing it was to create a different path.
Mm.
Because we, as you know, in the UK, we have been having this discussion about
Yeah.
decolonizing the curriculum.
Mhm.
But you know, also as we both know, it's not leading anywhere. Because for many reasons. But most importantly, it's not a comprehensive approach.
Mhm.
It's not an approach that really aims to solve the gap the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and I feel like a lot of it is, let's get some brown and black people in a room and ask them questions and have that put in a report, which is not needed because you have like an entire data and statistics showing that people of color are suffering year after year, right?
Mm-hmm.
In different disciplines. So we wanted to move to a way of an understanding, a way of bringing people together instead of dividing people into, these are British citizens, these are international citizens, these are white
Yeah.
people, these are people of color. Let's make a movement that calls for solidarity, bring people
Mm-hmm.
together.
Yeah.
Um,
Solidarity.
Yes, and so it's based on solidarity, it's based on collaboration, it's based on understanding empathy. So
Mm-hmm.
it's based on empathizing with the other person. And above all, it's based on resistance, right? It's based on the place that you're giving
Mm-hmm.
and how you want to change that place.
Yeah.
You define your place and where you're going with that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's based on a very community feeling.
Yeah.
Then I feel like there are a lot of noise from my side.
Mm-hmm.
Should we do can
I
you
can
can
I can mute my mic when you are speaking. See if it stops.
No, I mean from my side, from my house, is there a lot of noise? Can you?
I didn't hear any of them actually. Don't
Okay,
worry.
okay, sorry,
I
okay.
think it automatically kind of like lower down the noise when you hear it when it's recorded. So don't worry. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, um we, as I said, I'm inspired by Audre Lorde. So Audre
Mm,
Lorde says our labor has become more important than our silence,
yeah.
and the labor born out of silence and in fighting silence is the labor and the story of the Global South Initiative.
Mm.
And it goes hand in hand with my research and what I deal with, because I deal with silences. I deal with a lot of silences,
Oh
with
yeah.
people whether people who have been silenced, people living in silence, or both. So it has led me to reflect a lot on my own silence,
Mm,
and the kind of silences that plague the soul, that kind of silence that Audre Lorde talked about.
mm.
And I reflect on how I had to reflect on how to break that silence, how to have the words of speaking
Yeah.
in a system that is built, not built on my words, built, built on my
Mm,
silence, right?
mm,
So, I the so this silence, as I said, have been echoed by colleagues of color and colleagues
mm-hmm.
from the global south. They spoke of marginalization, invisibility, and alienation,
Yeah.
and these feeling characterize their experience in academia.
Mm,
So it is important to stress here the word marginalization, the
yeah.
words marginalization, invisibility, and alienation, because we keep hearing that we are underrepresented.
Mm-hmm. Can
And
I ask
yeah,
before you continue? Can I ask you to because I see we're slowly moving for you to talk more about yourself and what you are doing.
yeah,
Can you
yeah,
say a little bit about your thesis? Like since you have submitted it, you could give us a brief kind of overview of it about the
yeah, yeah,
silence. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Um, so I'm really interested, as I said, in resistance, but how
Mm,
do you write resistance when people cannot really talk about things they have lived through, or the stories have been censored or erased and stuff like that. So I'll give you an example of how my field work
yeah.
went. Uh, so I feel like the best way to explain is to tell stories. So
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is
Of
it.
course.
So in my Korean home, my first interview, a friend sits on the edge of the golden color couch of my living room. She takes with her small body the least possible amount of space and looks for most of the interview to the space ahead of her, as if she her. Sorry.
No worries.
I'll go again. In my Cairn home, my first interviewee, a friend, sits on the edge of the golden color couch of my living room. She takes with her small body the least possible amount of space and looks for most of the interview to the space ahead of her, as if her thoughts and memory have been discarded in the air. But at the same point, she poignantly looks at me. It's when she tells me that she has not been politically active after 2013. I did not go to the streets again. I did not feel that I can. I don't think it will make a difference. She cuts herself off. She qualifies her statement. Actually, I was not allowed to go to the streets. She goes completely silent after that, but turns her face to look into my eyes. Her eyes are telling me that what I already know. I know what made her go silent, who made her, and how. I also know that I saw her once screaming with anger, so much anger that her body was almost jumping with every word at a car full of police officers when they stopped her car for a motorcade of an official. I know that she doesn't scream anymore. Her body does not move out of anger even if she stopped. I know, but how can I speak for the muted, for the paralyzed?
I'm
I was
having the
able to hear.
images that you are read when you are reading
Yeah,
the stories like this, and like,
yeah,
yeah. Sometimes it's a silence, but it's not just the way they don't want to speak. There are a lot of
yeah.
reasons that they remain silent.
Yeah, and this is why I write my thesis in an autoethnographic manner,
Mhm.
is that how people voices were scratched,
Yeah.
how they could not remember, how don't want to remember or can't remember, but it's the how can I unpack the silences that is embodied, and tell their stories because they have lived something that is worth telling.
Mhm.
Um, so it was so, and it's also understanding that it's not the stories, their stories might defy the order, the linearity, the temporality that we learn in academia.
Mm.
From 2000 to 2010 2011, this happened and then this happened and then this happened, but people's stories don't actually work like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, people who live with trauma, that live in the past for a very long time, even if they seem to live with you in the present, right?
Yeah.
So um so these discontinued story, how
Mm.
to make them into order, how to fit them into how to fit them into academic order and the
Yeah.
neatness of academia. But there was a lot of violence in trying to pack them in a way that they did not
Yeah.
fit into, because it would not be authentic. So I
Yeah.
tried to write these stories of, the muteness, the
Mm.
paralysis that I felt in these stories,
Yeah.
because they also echoed something that I felt in my own heart. Something
Yeah.
I went through. I went through the movement of change myself,
Yeah.
so I know how I knew the pain that people were going through.
Yeah.
Um, So I wanted to write in an autoethnographic way, sharing my stories and merging it with people's stories and the analysis of these stories
Mm.
to to make their stories heard, to write something for them.
Yeah.
So something they can relate to, something they can access,
Yeah.
but in their own language as well.
Yeah.
So that
It
was
reminds
kind of
me.
the,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead,
I
please.
think what you are just trying to say, the problem of we can see each other, we don't know. I don't want to interpret. So, and I was just trying to say, like, when you read this and all of this, when you talk about autoethnography, I just think it would such like, if it's like activism, it could be put into like an exhibition, or kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
like a special exhibition to talk all about this, because
yeah,
or it developed into a one person show, all of this,
yeah,
so there are more creative ways that you could present your
yeah,
research. Or
yeah,
like when you were reading it, I kind of like a visual person, so
yeah,
imagine how it was like. I
yeah,
think that's that's one of the things that communicate with people. Like
Yeah,
similarly, like when we try to do mapping inspirational women in podcast instead of just
yeah.
with maps or just with text, it's kind of like provides different media for people to interact and to know about the stories. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And changing the way we write
Yeah.
to convey something that, as you say, you can see with your own eye, something that is living, something that is
Mm,
vivid, something that you can feel, that you, instead of listening to these people's story as the other or something, it's of
mhm,
people's stories somewhere far away you cannot connect to. You can feel it because these are people, these are human feelings anyone can
mm,
connect to.
mm,
So highlighting that, I try to highlight it by writing it in a story format, but also adding fiction, adding poetry,
yeah.
adding stuff like that, adding songs, uh, because to kind of bring in the gaps that
Yeah.
is that these silences. So for example, one of my field work, um one of my interviews told me she could not say, she tried to convey a complicated emotion, and
Mm,
she could not really say how she felt, why she felt it,
mm,
uh how things were at the time. So she told me, do you know this poem? So
uh,
she asked me if I know a poem, and then she stopped
oh,
talking. So
yeah.
after the interview, I went and I checked the poem to understand how she felt, what she
Mm,
wanted to tell me.
yeah.
So fiction can, as you said, there are tools that can help us
Mm,
make academia better, make writing better, more accessible, more human, more living,
mm,
speaks of people and to people, because usually we write about people and but not to them, not for
yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So it's sometimes it is sometimes feels like that we're writing from an ivory tower, a book that will be put on a shelf.
Mhm.
So this is not
That's
that
not
kind
what
of
we
work.
want. Yeah, that's
This is
definitely
not that
not
kind of
two of
work.
us want. We don't
Yeah.
want our thesis to be just on the shelf.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now I think we gradually move to the third section of this, like about the possible futures. Like, how would you
Yeah.
like your thesis to be read? How would you like it to be interpreted? And the Global South Initiative, where did you see? Where would it go?
Um, so I mean, in terms of my academic work, I think
Hmm.
I would like to create more stories
Hmm.
as and uh that are difficult to tell,
Yeah.
and and also about people who are not used to
Hmm.
being heard and stuff like that. So it's
Yeah.
stories of the marginalized, basically.
Yeah.
And that goes with the Global South Initiative as well. So
Hmm.
the Global South Initiative started with, as I said in the beginning, a bunch of PhD students who were frustrated with how things are, and it grew so much,
Yeah.
as you know, into, now we have faculty, we have undergrads, we have all kinds of postgrads,
Yeah.
so we have, and also we don't have, also we have Warwick University, but we have other universities like Sterling, like we have members, uh, great members like you and your friends and colleagues who came and joined us. But we also reach out to the community in Coventry and the Midlands as well.
Hmm.
So it became that kind of community where people come and learn from each other, right, and listen to each other. Of course, we highlight, as I said, stories of the marginalized. We put that at the forefront, right?
Yeah.
So you're gonna hear about Iran, you're gonna hear about Palestine, you're gonna hear about Chinese cinema. You're gonna and or you're gonna have sit down and have lunch that is made by a Korean student, and she tells you the stories of her mother and grandmother.
Oh,
So there are different ways of bringing us together and teaching each other
yeah.
who we
It's
are,
about the
where we come
communities that
from.
you're building up.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
it really starts with the community, or bringing people together, and making the people. So when we have an event, people actually, when we have an event, we have very few management members. So but
Mm,
we have, it's a big initiative though. So if
mm,
someone has so usually we're moved by our members. So if someone says, okay, I'm angry about this, or I'm passionate about this
mm,
movie, I'm angry about what's happening in Sudan, or I'm passionate about, I'm passionate about Algerian movies, for example, where we
Mhm.
have, okay, let's lead a movie about Algeria or Chile, where
Yeah.
Chilean and Algerian lead the discussion and tell their stories.
Mm.
You know, let's have an event about so we have GSI movie. We sit down together and tell poetry from our own countries.
Yeah.
So it's led by people from the initiative, and
Mm.
in that way they create their own space,
Yeah.
and
I
in
feel
that
like,
way a
yeah.
community builds something and decolonize by themselves, decolonize the space
Mm.
that was not meant to them, for
Yeah.
them, for in the first place, right?
Yeah. I was just
So,
going to
and
say
provide
it's,
knowledge.
yeah. I was trying to say like what this is like they're not told to do this thing. What they are doing is what they really want to do in this
Exactly.
community. Yeah.
Exactly. It's creating the space that we want, that
Mm.
we have dreamed of when we were. So it's creating the space we really belong to, but we really want to see as well.
Mm.
This is not to say that, when we talk about the global south, we global south is something that we can define ourselves as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not something imported, or it's something that we constantly discuss and redefine. What does it mean?
Mm.
And since it has been defined as people who are traumatized by colonialism, for example, one of the definitions that some of the members believe in, but also marginalized voices. So we have a lot
Yes.
of queer voices. We have a lot of people with different disabilities who come and talk and explain to people what it feels
Mm.
to be like them, you know,
Yeah.
and it really crosses a lot of bridges and brings people together. So it's
Mm.
not about something that we're saying we're all the same, because
Yeah.
definitely we're not. It,
Mm.
it's celebrating these differences and coming
Mm.
together by understanding one another, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, so hopefully we'll have we want to write about this experiences, the experience of the global south as an alternative
Mm.
to, or as a lived experience to a
Yes.
decolonizing education, something that we experimental that we've tried, and so apart from writing this, we want to branch, we want to keep expanding
Mm.
in the UK academia and in Europe. There are already many I've seen a number of initiatives on the global south, so
Yeah.
it's something that people want to engage in, that people
Mm.
feel that is missing in
Yeah.
Western academia. And there are few people from global south who are given the platform.
Mm.
So this is something that we're working on.
That's great. And I also, now this podcast is coming to an end, but we always end
Thank you,
with a
Sal.
question that you uh, respond to previous guests, like
Yeah.
um based on our conversation. I know that you want to choose the questions raised by Lina Samha, who's
Mm,
actually also a global south scholar, I would say. And so
amazing.
Lina asked this question to future guests. So first is, for internationals living in a different culture, what are the challenges you have faced?
Hmm. Uh, I think that's a really good question. I think the way that there are so many good things that you are usually find a community of people from the international community that are welcoming and are helpful and stuff like that. Uh, but the challenges usually come from the institution, I feel,
Mm-hmm.
is that the institution is not built for internet, even though there is a big number, like a large portion of the students are international students, and these are something that the UK universities are proud of. The reality is that the system is not built for international students.
Mm.
So whether it is the daily frustrations that I told you about, you don't feel like you have your space, you don't feel like you fit, you don't feel like that there is a lecture that is about you or that you're interested in that you can go to. Uh, but more practical and more serious issues. For example, um, one of the things that many of us experience, and unfortunately experience, is that people were saying you can take a break and go back home if you're feeling pressured, and that really is meant for is something in a mechanism in the system that is a good mechanism, but it is meant for British citizens. If you are an international student,
Sure.
and if you are an international student, that would mean that would
Visa. Yeah.
affect the visa. uh,
Yeah.
affect the visa. That means that you have to reapply and pay for the visa again, pay for the NHS fees, pay for this and this and that. So it's a huge load for international students who was taking some time off because they're stressed or because they're ill or something like that. So it's something, it's one example, but it shows that a lot of the advices or a lot of the mechanism that are
Mm.
already in place
Yeah.
are made for British citizens.
Yeah.
So the challenges comes in, like, how do you find a path, and how do you find a way to thrive, to survive and thrive, if there is no one to guide you. There is literally no guidebook about it, right? There is
Yeah.
usually no guidebook for international students. So usually we ask each other, right? You
Yeah.
must know this. This is this.
I know.
We ask each other. We ask each other, but unfortunately sometimes there's something that one of us did not experience, and we're
Mm.
like, oh my God, okay. Not, and for example, after I had that experience with the
Mm.
visa, I came back and I told everyone, don't do that.
Yes.
But I mean, this idea that try and error, this idea that,
Mm.
you have to suffer first, there are
Yeah.
ways to prevent that. And usually universities have excellent immigration services team that can prevent
Mm.
something like that. If, for
Mm.
example, departments say, oh, talk to them first or something like.
Yeah.
Um, the other issue is well-being,
Mm.
and uh, and this is something I did not experience personally. I did not have um, any problem with well-being services or anything, and I don't think like there is a problem per se with well-being services.
Mm.
It's just that they are. Um, when I say there's no problem, I mean like it is the way the model is created after. It is not created for
Mm.
people who come with a different culture, from a
Yeah.
different country, that
Mm.
speak more than one language.
Yeah.
So it is catered for, again, for the citizen
Local
of the
student. Yeah. For
exactly.
domestic students.
So a lot of people feel like they're unheard, or
Mm.
when they don't find
Unseen.
the space yeah, exactly. So these are the two main issues that come to mind that I believe can be fixed easily.
Mm.
There are more serious structural problems that we all have to work on. And I
Mm.
think like sometimes we really go into this conversation of global north, global south, or white
Yeah.
and people of color, and we forget that the best educational experience is an education that brings us all together. you
Yes.
know and if 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 education is based on coloniality, that means it's based on division.
Mm.
It's based on lack of knowledge. It's based
Yeah.
on, or a limited amount of knowledge.
Mm.
So it's never a good experience for all of us. But if we make it about the community, if we make it about empathy, if we make it about bringing people together, learning about one another, that
Mm.
seems like, for me, that's a more enriching experience to all of us.
Yeah. It's actually so interesting because this morning I was confirming an online course I'm going to lead. It's called Imagine Education for All. That's
Oh,
what you were
amazing.
trying to what you're trying to
Yes,
say.
yes,
It's
yes,
exactly what
yes.
I try to convey in the online course I'm going to give later in April. It will be
Amazing.
in Chinese and English, but mainly in Chinese because I
Wow.
yeah.
Oh, that sounds amazing. That sounds
Yeah.
amazing. I
Like
would
I
love
need
to
to
be
have a
your
high
student.
five. I
Please sign me up.
it will be mainly for people who speak in Chinese because
Okay.
so the social enterprise I'm collaborating with, they
Yeah.
they are providing this kind of like short online courses for
Yeah.
students who have never kind of like have this experience, have small classes and more focus on discussion. So that's why I
Yeah.
had one with them. But I think if it goes on well, I would like to develop into an open online course that everyone could sign in, although it's called a
Absolutely.
course, but it's more like a co-construction together. Because what I try to
Absolutely.
bring in is from the series and research projects I've been involved in, like you said, about bringing my own experience, but also bringing the lens of theory and concepts to imagine education for all. How could it be? Like you
That's
said, how could it bring us together?
That sounds wonderful. That sounds really, really wonderful. You should go for it. And I think like there should be more courses like that. So I really salute you for taking the initiative.
Let's do it. And then about the second question
Yeah.
raised by Lina. So,
Yeah.
in your first language,
Oh,
is there
yeah.
some idiom that you would like to share? Could you say them first in your
Mm.
first language, and explain it means if it's not English?
Okay. Um, so I don't know. I'm trying to think what comes to mind. Um, I think there is one that I used in my thesis.
Exciting.
In Arabic, it's makr al-fallahin.
Welcome for Lahin.
Yeah, and it translates to the cunningness of farmers.
Cunningness of
And
farmers.
yes, so basically, when Egypt was occupied by Britain, and before that there was the Ottoman as well.
Mm,
And so because most of the population in Egypt were farmers,
mm,
and they were the most exploited
yeah,
sector of the society.
mm,
Um, So in terms of farming, in terms of taxes, in terms of any kind of labor, they would be the one to be exploited.
mm,
Um, Farmers in Egypt try to come up with certain tricks
mm.
and things to do
Resist.
to resist, right? And one Egyptian scholars Mahmoud Auda, he calls it passive resistance. So basically, they
Mm,
did, I mean, even though they, at some points, they did go to the streets and they did resist uh, quite um, quite aggressively, if that's the word, quite actively.
mm,
But anyway, so for example, when Muhammad Ali uh, who was the ruler of Egypt under the
mm,
Ottoman Empire, he wanted to build a huge army to
mm.
be able to sustain his place
Yeah.
under the Ottoman Empire. So to make that, he wanted to create this great, huge army, right?
Mm,
And the cost of that army were paid by the farmers. So the at that point and until now, but I mean, Muhammad Ali is the one who invented it. There was a law that requires all young male to go to the army,
mm,
the conscripts law. So that meant that farmers who actually rely on their children themselves and their children for farming suddenly didn't have any labor, and
oh,
that would make lead them to not have any food and stuff like that. So to
the cunning of
so
farmers, right?
so what they did is, for example, they would cut what like the young males would cut one of the tip of one of the fingers,
Oh,
the finger that is used to shoot
oh,
arms,
mm,
right?
oh,
So they would be completely uneligible
disabled.
for
Yeah.
to go to the army. So
Mm,
and and that kind of resistance, and of course, how much money how much water they get for their land, how
Mm,
much taxes they would pay, the way they would try to get away with things to be able to
mm,
survive, little bits of tricks, and
mm,
so the foreign soldiers, when they started witnessing these things, they started to call it makr al-falahin, which is the farmer's cunningness.
mm,
And so it is blaming the people who are forced to do things and are experiencing injustice, unbearable injustice,
mm,
uh, and blaming them, and stating, oh, it's because you're cunning.
mm,
It's not that we're cunning and making you do that, but
mm,
you're cunning for trying to find ways to get away with it. So I think that's the way we understand, in many ways, understand politics, understand
mm,
history, is
yeah,
that we reverse, instead of listening to people's stories and
yeah,
understanding where they come from, their
mm,
desperation, the way they
mm,
only want to survive and stuff like that.
yeah.
Um, so we usually hear, so for example, this expression has been living in Egypt until now and still used without knowing its history.
Ah,
Uh, so because
thanks for telling
usually,
me. Mm,
yes, because usually the story of the powerful, the
mm,
the people who write history, even if it's not you, not your people, this
mm,
is the story that lives on.
mm,
So
yeah.
it's quite a grim way to end the podcast, but I thought it was a good example.
But this is the way for me to say, like, that's why I'm mapping inspirational women, because I notice, like, worldwidely, women are the people who don't get to tell the story. Even when we
Yes.
talk about history, it's always his story. Women
Yes,
were not
absolutely.
were the second sex in this. Women
Absolutely.
were being
Absolutely.
marginalized in the stories that I want
And
to
thank
have
you
this
so much for
initiative.
doing this. Thank
Yeah,
you so much for doing this, for creating, for giving a platform to our stories, for to
I
giving a
want to.
platform to
Yeah,
tell
I'm
our
glad that.
stories.
Yeah, I'm glad you came. This is not the end, though. You are you are invited to ask a question to future guests as well.
Oh, okay. Oh, this is amazing. I think maybe ask a positive question
Okay.
is, um what is the biggest challenge that you have faced but conquered, something that you have conquered, something that you know was
Yeah,
able to, yeah, to thrive, even that you faced it, you've thrived after it, thrived because you faced, experienced it, and
yeah,
and lived better for that experience.
yeah. Personally feel like I have a lot to tell about this, and
Really?
yeah, yeah. So
Oh,
because I came to UK for PhD in 2017 and
yeah,
only finished my viva recently. It is
yeah,
very not ordinary because
yeah,
I
yeah.
faced incredibly difficult challenge. I personally
Wow.
think it's for now. Maybe future I will have bigger challenges to conquer,
Yeah,
but this
yeah,
is what I conquered in this, to come to a different culture and trying
yeah,
to prove that I'm academically sufficient enough to
yeah,
finish it.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
yeah, well,
Yeah,
that's another thing to go. But I also
I would.
quite looking forward to
I,
people
I
who
I
come
can
to me.
tell. I can tell there are so many stories there,
Yeah,
and so many stories of hardship, but
challenges.
also
Yeah,
but also shows how strong-willed you are. I'm
yeah,
pretty sure. Yeah.
yeah. We'll talk about it some other day.
Yeah.
Thank you for thank
Thank
you
you
for
so much. I
joining.
love this. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So the question from Sarah to future guests is, what is the biggest challenge that you have conquered?
Yes.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks to anyone who's listening to this and not get bored.
Thanks for spending time with us. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.